The champagne glasses clinked together as laughter filled the luxurious penthouse apartment. Richard Morrison stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the glittering Manhattan skyline. He loved these monthly parties. They reminded him of how far he'd come from his middle-class upbringing in Ohio. Now, at 42, he owned a tech company worth billions, and everyone wanted to be in his inner circle. "Richard, darling, you simply must tell everyone about the yacht," called out Patricia, one of his regular guests. She was draped in a dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Richard smiled and raised his glass. About 50 people filled his living room tonight. Tech executives, fashion designers, a few actors, and several people whose only job seemed to be attending parties and posting about them online. The servers moved smoothly through the crowd, offering expensive appetizers on silver trays. Everything was perfect, just the way Richard liked it. The penthouse itself was a masterpiece of modern design. White marble floors reflected the light from 3 enormous crystal chandeliers. Abstract paintings worth hundreds of thousands of dollars hung on the walls. And in the corner near the window sat Richard's most impressive purchase, a gleaming black Steinway grand piano. He'd paid $200,000 for it 6 months ago, not because he played, but because it looked sophisticated. It was a statement piece like everything else in his carefully curated life. "More champagne over here," someone called out, and Richard noticed movement near the hallway. It was the cleaning lady, or one of them anyway. He'd never really paid attention before. The building's cleaning service sent different people, and they usually came late at night when everyone was asleep. Tonight was different, though. With the party happening, he'd asked them to send someone early to make sure everything was spotless. The woman looked to be in her early 50s, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore the standard uniform, navy blue polo shirt and black pants. She was pushing a small cart with cleaning supplies, trying to stay out of the way as she worked. Richard noticed how she seemed to fade into the background, moving along the edges of the room like she was invisible. His friend David nudged him. "Must be weird for them, right? Seeing how the other half lives?" Richard shrugged. He didn't really think about it. These were the people who kept his world running smoothly, but they existed in a different realm entirely. He paid for a service, they provided it. Simple transaction. The party continued for another hour. More champagne flowed. People laughed at jokes that weren't particularly funny. Someone suggested they should all fly to Richard's beach house in the Hamptons the following weekend. The usual chatter of people who had too much money and too much time. Then Richard had what he thought was a brilliant idea. Maybe it was the whiskey talking. He'd switched from champagne about an hour ago. Or maybe it was the way his guests always seemed to want entertainment. Something to make the evening memorable. His eyes drifted to the piano, then to the cleaning lady who was now wiping down the marble counter in the open kitchen area. "Hey," Richard called out, his voice carrying across the room. "Come here for a second." The woman looked up, surprised. She glanced around as if he might be talking to someone else. When she realized he meant her, she set down her cleaning cloth and walked over. The conversations around them started to quiet down. People sensed something interesting was about to happen. "What's your name?" Richard asked, though he wasn't particularly interested in the answer. "Maria," she said quietly. Her English had a slight accent. "Maria, nice. So, Maria, I'm curious about something." Richard gestured toward the piano with his whiskey glass, some of the amber liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. "You ever play piano?" He could see the confusion in her eyes. Around them, his guests were starting to smile. They sensed where this was going. Someone snickered softly. A long time ago," Maria said carefully. "Perfect." Richard's voice was too loud, too enthusiastic in the way drunk people often are. "Come on, give us a little performance. Everyone here would love to hear you play." He could see her hesitation. The room had gone almost completely silent now. 20 pairs of eyes watching this woman in her cleaning uniform standing next to a millionaire in a custom-tailored suit. Several people had pulled out their phones. This was going to be social media gold. The awkward moment when the cleaning lady tried to play a piano that cost more than she probably made in several years. Patricia giggled behind her hand. David grinned widely. This was exactly the kind of random entertainment these parties needed. "I shouldn't," Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have work to finish." "Oh, come on," Richard insisted. his tone friendly but with an edge that suggested refusing wasn't really an option. Just one song. Consider it part of the service. More laughter rippled through the room. Maria stood there for a long moment and something shifted in her expression. It wasn't anger exactly or resignation. It was something else entirely. Something Richard was too buzzed and too sure of himself to recognize. She looked at the piano, then back at him. "Okay," she said simply. "One song." The crowd parted as Maria walked to the piano bench. She didn't hurry and she didn't act embarrassed. She simply moved with quiet dignity, her worn sneakers silent on the expensive marble floors. She sat down on the bench and adjusted it slightly, moving it closer to the keys. Her hands hovered over the keyboard for a moment. Richard leaned against the bar, already smiling at the story he'd tell tomorrow. David had his phone up, recording. Patricia whispered something to the woman next to her, and they both laughed quietly. The whole room waited, expecting something awkward, something they could laugh about later. Maria's fingers touched the keys. What happened next would change everything. The first notes floated into the room, and they weren't the clumsy plinking everyone expected. They were pure and perfect, each one crystal clear. The melody was beautiful, something classical that Richard didn't recognize but that made the hair on his arm stand up. Maria's hands moved across the keyboard like they'd been doing this forever, like the piano was an extension of her own body. The smiles started to fade from faces around the room. Phones that had been held up to capture a joke slowly lowered. Someone's glass of champagne tilted, forgotten until champagne spilled onto the white marble floor. Nobody noticed. The music filled every corner of the penthouse, rich and complex and absolutely masterful. This wasn't someone who'd taken a few piano lessons as a kid. This was someone who understood music at a level most people never reach. Her fingers flew over the keys during the fast sections, then slowed to draw out notes so tender they seemed to ache. Richard felt his smile disappear. He stood up straight, the whiskey suddenly making him feel sick rather than confident. Around him, his guests stared in complete silence, watching this woman they'd been ready to mock create something absolutely beautiful. Maria didn't look at anyone. She was somewhere else entirely, lost in the music. Her eyes were closed, and her whole body swayed slightly with the rhythm. Whatever world she'd come from, whatever had brought her to this penthouse with a cleaning cart tonight, none of it mattered. Right now she was pure talent, pure artistry, pure grace. The music built to a crescendo that made several people gasp, then softened into an ending so gentle it felt like a whisper. The last note hung in the air, resonating through the silent room. Maria opened her eyes. She stood up from the bench, smoothed her uniform, and looked directly at Richard. Her expression was calm, unreadable. Without saying a word, she walked back to her cleaning cart and picked up her cloth, ready to continue her work as if nothing had happened. Nobody laughed. Nobody said anything at all. They just stood there, 50 wealthy people in designer clothes, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Richard felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time: genuine shame. The silence in the penthouse felt thick, almost suffocating. Richard stood frozen by the bar, his whiskey glass still in his hand, staring at Maria as she calmly returned to her cleaning cart. She picked up her spray bottle and cloth like nothing extraordinary had just happened, like she hadn't just made 50 wealthy people question everything they thought they knew. Patricia was the first to break the silence. Where did you—" She trailed off, unable to finish her sentence. Her phone was still in her hand, the video still recording. Maria didn't answer. She simply moved to the next surface that needed cleaning, spraying the marble countertop with practiced efficiency. Her face showed no emotion, no pride, no anger, no satisfaction, just quiet focus on her work. David lowered his phone slowly. "Richard," he said quietly, "I think you should probably say something." Richard's mouth felt dry. He wanted to speak, wanted to apologize, but the words stuck in his throat. What could he possibly say? Sorry for assuming you were just a cleaning lady? Sorry for treating you like entertainment? Every possible phrase sounded worse in his head. One of the guests, a woman named Jennifer who ran an art gallery, stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said to Maria, her voice respectful now. "That was Chopin, wasn't it? The Nocturne?" Maria paused in her cleaning and nodded slightly. "Yes, in E-flat major." "And the second piece?" "That was incredible." "Liszt," Maria said simply. Hungarian Rhapsody number 2. Jennifer's eyes widened. Those are advanced pieces. Very advanced. Where did you study? For the first time, something flickered across Maria's face. A shadow of old pain, or maybe just memory. Curtis Institute. A long time ago. The room erupted in whispers. Curtis Institute of Music was one of the most prestigious music schools in the world. Getting accepted there was harder than getting into Harvard. Only the most talented musicians in the world walked through those doors. Richard finally found his voice. You went to Curtis? He sounded like he couldn't believe it, which made him feel even worse about himself. Maria looked at him directly. I was accepted on full scholarship when I was 17. I studied there for 3 years. She said it matter-of-factly, without pride or bitterness. Just stating a simple truth, but then, why are you... Patricia started to ask, then realized how terrible the question sounded and stopped. Why am I cleaning houses? Maria finished for her. Life happens. Family needed help. Choices had to be made. She said it like it was the most natural thing in the world, which somehow made it even more devastating. The party was completely ruined now, though nobody wanted to leave. The mood had shifted from light entertainment to something heavier, more real. People stood around in small clusters, talking in low voices about what they'd just witnessed. Several had tears in their eyes. Others kept looking at Maria, then at their expensive clothes and jewelry as if seeing everything differently now. Richard set down his whiskey glass. His hands were shaking slightly. He walked over to where Maria was cleaning, each step feeling like it took enormous effort. Maria, he said quietly, I need to apologize. What I did was, I was cruel. I thought I was being funny and I wasn't. I'm sorry. Maria stopped cleaning and looked at him. Her dark eyes were intelligent and clear, taking his measure. You thought I would embarrass myself, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Richard admitted, because there was no point in lying now. I did, and that says terrible things about me. It does, Maria agreed, and her honesty stung more than any angry words could have. But at least you can admit it. That's something. She returned to her work, but Richard didn't walk away. He stood there, watching her clean his expensive countertops, feeling smaller than he'd felt in years. Around them, the party was dissolving. People were gathering their coats, saying quiet goodbyes. The energy had completely changed. David approached Richard. Hey man, I'm going to head out. But listen, I recorded the whole thing. The video it's powerful. If she's okay with it, this should be shared. People need to see this. Richard looked at Maria. Would that be all right, if the video was posted online? Maria paused, thinking. Will it show your face too? Show what you thought would happen? Yes, David said. It shows everything. Your performance, but also the setup. The context, then yes, Maria said. People should see it. Maybe it will make them think twice before they judge someone by their job. David nodded and left. Within an hour, the penthouse was empty except for Richard and Maria. She continued cleaning while he sat on his expensive couch, watching her work. He felt like he should say something more, do something more, but he didn't know what. Why did you keep playing piano? He finally asked. After Curtis, I mean. If you couldn't pursue it professionally. Maria stopped and turned to face him. For the first time, she seemed willing to actually talk. Maybe because everyone else was gone. Or maybe because his question was genuine. Because the music doesn't care if I'm playing in Carnegie Hall or in an empty church at midnight, she said. The notes are the same. The beauty is the same. I play because not playing would be like not breathing. She explained in her careful English how she'd come to America from the Philippines with dreams as big as the ocean she'd crossed. How her father's business had collapsed back home. How her mother had gotten sick, needed expensive treatments. How Maria had made the choice to leave Curtis and work. Any work she could find to send money home. I was supposed to debut at Carnegie Hall when I was 23, she said. And for the first time, her voice held real emotion. Everything was arranged. My career was about to start. But then life happened, and I had to choose between my dreams and my family. So I chose family. Richard listened, and every word felt like a mirror held up to his own privileged existence. He'd never had to choose between dreams and survival. His path had been smooth, paved with family money and connections. When he'd started his tech company, he'd had a safety net. If he'd failed, he wouldn't have ended up on the streets. Do you regret it? He asked quietly. Maria thought about this for a long moment. I regret that I had to choose it all. I regret that the world is set up so that talent isn't enough. You also need money and luck and the right passport. But do I regret helping my family? No, never. She finished her cleaning and checked her watch. It was almost midnight. I need to go. I have 2 more buildings to clean tonight. 2 more? Richard was shocked. You work all night? Most nights, yes. 3 buildings, sometimes 4. I sleep during the day when I can. She gathered her supplies and headed for the door. Wait, Richard said, standing up. Can we talk again? Tomorrow, maybe? When you're not working? Maria looked at him with those intelligent, measuring eyes. Why? Because I want to do better, Richard said honestly. And I think maybe you could teach me how. She considered this, then nodded slowly. There's a cafe on Amsterdam Avenue. Rose's. I'll be there tomorrow at 2 in the afternoon before my shift starts. After she left, Richard stood in his empty penthouse surrounded by all his expensive things. The piano sat in the corner, no longer just a status symbol. Now it represented something else entirely, a reminder that every person you overlook might be extraordinary, that the woman who cleans your floors might have more talent in her little finger than you have in your entire body. That worth isn't measured by bank accounts. He picked up his phone and saw that David had already posted the video. In just 3 hours, it had been viewed 2 million times. The comments were pouring in. Some praised Maria's incredible talent. Others called Richard out for his behavior. But most simply asked the same question over and over. How many Marias are out there in the world, hidden in plain sight, their gifts unseen because we're too blind to look? Richard watched the video again, seeing himself through new eyes. The smug expression on his face before Maria played. The shock afterward. The shame. He looked like a fool, and he deserved it. But maybe, he thought, this was his chance to become something better than the man in that video. Maybe Maria's music had done more than just shock a room full of wealthy people. Maybe it had cracked open a door to a different way of seeing the world. He set an alarm for noon. Tomorrow he would meet Maria at the cafe. And tomorrow his real education would begin. Richard barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Maria's face, calm and dignified even when he'd tried to make her into a joke. By morning, the video had been viewed over 20 million times. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications. News outlets wanted interviews. People were calling him everything from entitled jerk to much worse things he didn't want to repeat. But mixed in with the criticism were other messages too. Music schools reaching out, asking how to contact Maria, concert venues offering performance opportunities, and strangest of all, people sharing their own stories about being underestimated, overlooked, judged by their appearance or accent or job title. Richard sat in Rose's cafe at 1:30, a full half-hour early. It was nothing like the places he usually went. No exposed brick or craft cocktails or servers who knew his name. Just a small neighborhood spot with cracked vinyl booths and a laminated menu offering coffee for $2. He felt completely out of place in his designer jacket. Maria arrived exactly at 2 o'clock. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair down around her shoulders. Without the cleaning uniform, she looked different, younger somehow despite the silver threads in her dark hair. She slid into the booth across from him. "You came," Richard said, surprised and relieved. "I said I would." Maria ordered coffee when the waitress came by, black, no sugar. They sat in awkward silence for a moment. Richard had spent the whole morning planning what to say, but now all his prepared words felt hollow. "I watched the video about 50 times last night," he finally said. "I look like such an idiot." "You were an idiot," Maria said bluntly. "But you apologized. That counts for something. The internet doesn't seem to think so. I'm getting torn apart out there." Maria sipped her coffee. "Maybe you needed to be. Maybe we all need to be reminded sometimes that other people are human, not just background characters in our story." Her words hit hard because they were true. That's exactly how Richard had seen her, as background, as scenery, as someone who existed only to serve his needs. He'd never wondered about her life, her dreams, her past. "Tell me about Curtis," he said. "What was it like?" Maria's expression softened slightly. "It was everything. I practiced 8-10 hours a day. My fingers would bleed sometimes, but I didn't care. I was surrounded by the best musicians in the world. People who understood that music isn't just notes on a page. It's a language, a way of expressing things words can't touch. She described her teachers, legendary pianists who saw something special in her. She talked about the first time she played with a full orchestra, how the power of all those instruments together had made her cry. She spoke about the feeling of perfect technical execution, when your hands know exactly what to do and the music just flows through you like water. I was going to be something, she said quietly. Not for fame or money, but because I had something to say through music, something important. What happened? Richard asked. Though he knew parts of the story already, Maria explained how the call had come during her 3rd year. Her father's manufacturing business in Manila had gone under. Debts everywhere. Her mother needed surgery. Expensive surgery the insurance wouldn't cover. Her 2 younger brothers were still in school. The family was drowning. I had a choice, she said. Stay at Curtis, pursue my dream, let my family lose everything. Or leave, find work, send money home. It wasn't really a choice at all. She'd left Curtis 3 months before her planned debut. No dramatic goodbye, no final performance. Just packed her bags and started looking for any job that would pay. Cleaning paid cash, didn't ask too many questions about immigration status, and had flexible hours. She could work nights and weekends, maximize her income. Did you ever go back to the Philippines? Richard asked. Once, 5 years ago, for my father's funeral. He never recovered from losing his business. The shame of it broke him. Maria's voice was flat, factual, but Richard could hear the pain underneath. My mother is in a care facility now. My brothers both graduated university. They have good jobs, so I guess it worked out in a way. But you lost your career. Your chance, Maria shrugged. Chances aren't guaranteed to anyone. I had mine and life took it away. Millions of people have talents they never get to fully use. I'm not special in that way. But she was special, Richard thought. The discipline to keep playing after losing everything. The grace to clean houses without bitterness. The dignity to face someone who'd mocked her and still show up for coffee. The video has changed things, Richard said carefully. People want to hear you play. Real venues, real opportunities. Concert halls are reaching out. Maria laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. I'm 51 years old. I work nights cleaning buildings. I don't have the right visa status to perform publicly for money, and even if I did, my hands aren't what they were. You lose something when you don't practice every day at that level. But you played beautifully the other night. I played one piece well, a full concert program, rehearsals, timing, stamina. That's different, she shook her head. That door closed a long time ago. I've made peace with it, Richard leaned forward. What if I could help? I have resources, connections. Immigration lawyers who could fix your visa situation. Access to practice spaces, instruments. What if you could have a second chance? Maria studied him for a long moment. Why would you do that? Because you feel guilty? Yes, Richard admitted, partly. But also because what I saw the other night was real talent. Maybe genius going to waste. And I have the ability to help, so shouldn't I? Help is tricky, Maria said carefully. Sometimes it comes with strings. Sometimes it's really about making the helper feel better about themselves. I know, and I won't pretend I'm being purely selfless here. But does the motivation matter if the result is good? Maria didn't answer right away. She finished her coffee, staring out the cafe window at the people passing by on the sidewalk. Working people, regular people, invisibles like she'd been. I don't want a concert career anymore, she finally said. That dream belongs to the 23-year-old girl I used to be. But there is something I want. Something I've thought about for years. What? I want to teach. Not at some fancy conservatory, but in communities like mine, places where kids have talent but no access, no opportunities. I want to show them that music belongs to everyone, not just people who can afford expensive lessons. Richard felt something shift inside him. Here was a chance to do something that mattered, something beyond making money or impressing people at parties. I'm starting a new project, he said, the idea forming as he spoke. A streaming platform for classical music education. I was thinking about it as a business venture, but maybe it could be more than that. What if you helped design it? Not as a favor, but as a partner. A real partnership with equity and decision-making power. Maria raised an eyebrow. You're serious? Completely. You understand music education at a level I never could. You know what struggling artists need because you've lived it. And honestly, my tech projects usually fail because I don't really care about them. I care about making money. But this could be different. I don't know anything about streaming platforms or technology. I do. That's what I bring. You bring the heart, The expertise, the vision. Together we could actually build something meaningful. Maria was quiet for a long time. Richard could see her thinking, weighing options, considering possibilities. He realized he was holding his breath. "I'd want creative control over the content," she finally said. "No compromises on quality. And I'd want scholarships built in, free access for kids who can't afford subscriptions. Done. And I'd want to hire teachers from immigrant communities, people who understand what it's like to be overlooked." "Absolutely. And I keep my cleaning job until this proves sustainable. I'm not putting my family at risk again." Richard nodded. "That's smart. We'll start small, build carefully." Maria extended her hand across the table. "Then let's try it. But if you turn this into something shallow or exploitative, I walk. Are we clear?" Richard shook her hand. Her grip was strong, her calluses rough against his palm. "We're clear." As they talked through the afternoon, discussing ideas and possibilities, Richard felt something he hadn't felt in years, genuine excitement about work. Not because of profit margins or market share, but because he was building something with purpose. When Maria finally left for her evening shift, Richard sat alone in the booth for a while longer. His phone was still blowing up with notifications about the video. People were calling him names, questioning his character, demanding he be canceled. But sitting there in that cheap cafe, drinking $2 coffee and planning a project that might actually help people, Richard thought maybe being canceled wasn't the worst thing. Maybe his old life needed to end so something better could begin. He left a $50 tip for the waitress and walked out into the afternoon sunlight, feeling lighter than he had in years. 6 months later, Richard sat in a small recording studio in Queens, watching Maria work with a nervous 15-year-old girl named Lynn. The girl had never touched a real piano before last month. Now her fingers moved hesitantly across the keys, stumbling through a simple Bach piece. "Stop thinking so hard," Maria said gently. "Music isn't a math problem. Feel where your fingers want to go." Lynn tried again, and this time something clicked. The notes came out smoother, more natural. Her face lit up with surprise and joy. Richard smiled, recognizing that expression. He'd seen it on dozens of kids' faces over the past few months. That moment when they realized they could actually do this. That music wasn't just for other people. The streaming platform had launched 3 months ago. They'd called it Keys for All, simple and direct. Maria had insisted on keeping it straightforward. No fancy branding, no pretentious mission statements. Just quality music education accessible to anyone with an internet connection. The response had been overwhelming. Within the first week, they had 50,000 users. Now they were approaching 500,000. Students from every continent, every background. Kids in rural towns who'd never seen a real piano teacher. Adults who'd always wanted to learn but could never afford lessons. Immigrant families who saw music as a path forward for their children. But Richard had learned that numbers didn't tell the whole story. The real impact was in moments like this, watching Lynn's face as she successfully played a piece she thought was impossible. "You're a natural," Maria told the girl. "Keep practicing, and in a few months we'll have you playing Chopin." "Like you?" Lynn asked, her eyes wide. She'd watched Maria's viral video probably 100 times. "Better than me if you work hard enough." After Lynn left, Maria turned to Richard. "We need to talk about scaling up. I'm getting requests from community centers across the country. They want in-person workshops to supplement the online content." "That's expensive," Richard said carefully. They'd been having this conversation a lot lately. Maria always wanted to expand faster than was financially prudent. "I know, but there's a gap between online learning and real mentorship. Some kids need hands-on guidance, especially at the beginning." Maria pulled out her phone and showed him emails, dozens of them from teachers, community leaders, parents, all asking for help. Richard studied the messages. 6 months ago, he would have seen only costs and complications. Now he saw potential and purpose. That was Maria's influence. She'd taught him to measure success differently. "Okay," he said. "Let's build a fellowship program. We identify talented musicians who want to teach. Maybe people like you who had to give up performance careers but still love music. We train them, pay them properly, and send them to communities that need them most." Maria's eyes brightened. "Like a Peace Corps for music education." "Exactly. And we document everything, create content for the platform. It becomes this cycle. The online content drives people to request in-person help. The in-person work creates more content. It's sustainable." They spent the next hour planning, throwing ideas back and forth. This was how they worked best, Richard realized. She'd push for expansion. He'd worry about practicality, and somewhere in the middle they'd find something that was both ambitious and achievable. His phone buzzed. Another interview request, this time from a major news network. Ever since the video had gone viral, media attention hadn't stopped. At first, the coverage had been brutal, rightfully calling out his behavior. But recently the narrative had shifted. People were interested in the redemption story, the partnership, the platform they'd built together. "Are you going to do it?" Maria asked, nodding at his phone. "Do you think I should?" "I think you've been hiding from the attention for months. Maybe it's time to own the whole story, the bad parts and what came after." Richard wasn't sure. Every interview felt like reliving his worst moment over and over. But Maria was right. Running from it didn't help anyone. That evening, Richard did the interview. The host was polite but direct. "Let's talk about that night. What were you thinking when you asked Maria to play?" Richard took a breath. "I was thinking I was better than her because I had money and she didn't. I was thinking her job defined her worth. I was thinking like someone who'd spent too long in a bubble where everyone looked and sounded like me." He paused. "I was thinking like a jerk. And what changed?" Maria's playing changed everything. But not just because she was talented. It was her dignity in that moment. She could have refused, could have made a scene, could have told me exactly what kind of person I was. Instead, she just played. She let her art speak. And it said more than any words could have. The host leaned forward. "Some people say this is all performative, that you're using Maria's story to rehabilitate your image. Those people aren't wrong to be skeptical," Richard admitted. "I can't prove my intentions. All I can do is the work. Maria and I have built something real. A platform that's reaching hundreds of thousands of students who'd never have access otherwise. If that helps my image, fine. But it's helping a lot of other people too, and that matters more." After the interview aired, Richard's phone exploded again, but this time the messages were different. People sharing their own stories of being humbled, of learning from their mistakes, of finding purpose after hitting bottom. A few were even asking how they could help. Donations for scholarships, volunteers for the fellowship program, music teachers wanting to join the platform. Maria called him late that night. "Did you see the donation page? We just passed $1 million in scholarship funds." Richard pulled up the website on his laptop. Sure enough, the number kept climbing. People were giving $10, $50, thousands. Small amounts and large, all adding up to something significant. "This is incredible," he said. "It's hope," Maria replied. "People want to believe in second chances. They want to believe that someone can mess up and then do better. Your interview gave them that." Richard felt emotion welling up in his throat. "I don't deserve this kind of response." "Maybe not. But those kids who'll get scholarships? They deserve it. So accept the grace and keep working." The next morning, Richard visited one of their new community center partnerships in the Bronx. 20 kids, ages 8 to 16, crowded into a room with 3 keyboards. Maria was teaching a group class, showing them basic chord progressions. One boy in the back wasn't participating. He sat with his arms crossed, looking angry at the world. Richard recognized that expression, the kid who'd been let down too many times to trust anything good. During the break, Richard sat next to him. "Not into piano?" The boy shrugged. "It's fine. I just don't see the point." "What do you mean?" "Like I learned to play, then what? I'm still from here. Still poor. Still nobody." Richard thought carefully about his response. "You're right that learning piano won't magically fix everything. It won't change where you're from or give you money or make life easier." The boy looked surprised by the honesty. "But it will give you something that's yours." Richard continued. "A skill, a language, a way to express yourself that nobody can take away. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes having one thing you're good at, one thing that makes you feel capable, that changes how you see yourself. And once you see yourself differently, other people start seeing you differently too." The boy considered this. "Is that what happened to you? You learned piano and everything changed?" "No. I learned about a woman who cleaned my floors and played piano better than most professionals. And that changed everything. It taught me that talent and worth have nothing to do with job titles or bank accounts, that I'd been walking past extraordinary people my whole life and never bothering to see them." "The cleaning lady from the video, that's her?" The boy nodded toward Maria. "That's her. She's the reason any of this exists." The boy watched Maria for a minute, seeing her differently now. She any good as a teacher? The best. Want to try actually participating? The boy uncrossed his arms. Yeah, maybe. For the rest of the class, the boy paid attention. He wasn't great, his fingers fumbled, he got frustrated, he made lots of mistakes. But he tried. And that was everything. As Richard drove home that evening, stuck in traffic on the Bronx River Parkway, he thought about how much had changed. 6 months ago, his life had been parties and deals and impressing people who didn't really matter. Now it was community centers and scholarship funds and watching kids discover they could be more than their circumstances. His penthouse felt empty these days. He'd been spending less time there, more time in neighborhoods he'd previously ignored. The fancy parties had stopped. Some friends had drifted away, uncomfortable with his new focus. But new people had entered his life, teachers, students, community organizers. Real people doing real work. His phone rang. Maria. I've been thinking, she said without preamble, about next steps. We've proven the model works, but there are other arts too. Dance, painting, theater. Kids who need access to all kinds of creative expression. You want to expand beyond music? I want to build something bigger. A whole network of arts education. Not someday now while we have momentum. Richard smiled. This was classic Maria. Always pushing, always reaching for more. 6 months ago, it would have stressed him out. Now it energized him. Let's talk tomorrow, he said. Come by the office. We'll map it out. Your office or a real office? He laughed. They'd been working mostly from coffee shops and community centers. You're right. We should probably get actual office space. See? You're learning. After hanging up, Richard sat in traffic, not minding the delay. He pulled up the video one more time, the one that had changed everything. Watched himself being foolish and cruel. Watched Maria transform a moment of mockery into something beautiful. The comment section had changed over the months. Less anger at him, more appreciation for Maria. And increasingly, stories from people who'd been inspired to pursue their own overlooked talents, to see the invisible people around them, to believe in second chances. One comment caught his eye. This video made me sign up for guitar lessons at 45. Never thought I could learn. Starting next week. Thank you both for showing it's never too late. Richard screenshotted it and sent it to Maria with a simple message. This is why we do it, she replied immediately. No, this is why we keep going. And he understood the difference. 2 years after that fateful party, Richard stood backstage at Carnegie Hall adjusting his tie for the 3rd time. His hands were shaking, which seemed ridiculous. He wasn't even performing, but tonight felt bigger than any business deal he'd ever closed. More important than any contract he'd ever signed. Stop fidgeting, Maria said, appearing beside him. She looked elegant in a deep blue dress, her hair swept up. You're making me nervous. I'm not the one performing in front of 2,000 people. I've done this before, remember? A long time ago. She smiled, but Richard could see the emotion in her eyes. I just never thought I'd get to do it again. The concert had been arranged through their foundation, which had grown far beyond what either of them had imagined. Keys for All now served over 2 million students across 40 countries. They'd expanded into dance, visual arts, and theater just as Maria had envisioned. But tonight was special. A benefit concert featuring musicians whose lives had been changed by the program. And Maria was the headliner. It had taken months to convince her. She'd insisted she wasn't ready, that her technique had suffered from years away from serious practice, that younger performers deserved the spotlight. But Richard and the entire team had worn her down. The students wanted to hear her play. The donors wanted to see her. And honestly, the world deserved to witness what they'd almost missed. 5 minutes, Miss Reyes, a stagehand called out. Maria took a deep breath. Richard squeezed her hand. You're going to be amazing. And if I mess up, then you mess up in front of people who love you. Nobody here is judging. We're all just grateful to hear you play. The first half of the concert had been beautiful. A 17-year-old violinist from Detroit who'd learned through their platform. A dance ensemble from a community center in Oakland. A youth orchestra from the Bronx, including that skeptical boy Richard had talked to 2 years ago. He played clarinet now, and pretty well. Each performance had brought the audience to their feet. These weren't polished professionals. They were real kids with raw talent and big dreams doing their best. And their best was extraordinary. Now it was Maria's turn. Richard watched from the wings as she walked onto the stage. The applause was thunderous, lasting almost 2 full minutes. Maria stood by the piano, visibly emotional, waiting for silence. When the hall finally quieted, she spoke. 30 years ago, I was supposed to perform on this stage, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the space. I was 23 years old, fresh from Curtis Institute, and I thought my life was just beginning. But sometimes life has other plans. Sometimes we have to set our dreams aside for the people we love, for responsibilities bigger than our own ambitions. She paused, collecting herself. I don't regret the choices I made. My family needed me, and I was there for them. But I won't lie, I grieved for what I lost. This stage, this moment, this life I'd worked so hard for, it all disappeared. The audience was absolutely silent, hanging on every word. Then 2 years ago, a man made a foolish mistake. He asked me to play his piano as a joke, expecting me to embarrass myself. She smiled slightly. Instead, something unexpected happened. That moment of cruelty became a doorway back to music, back to purpose, back to myself. Maria looked toward the wings, directly at Richard. That man is here tonight. He's become a friend, a partner, and someone who taught me that people can change when they're willing to be uncomfortable, to face their worst selves, to do better. She turned back to the audience. Tonight I'm playing for everyone who's had to postpone their dreams. For every parent working multiple jobs so their kids can have opportunities they never had. For every immigrant who left home searching for something better. For every person told they're too old, too poor, too late to pursue what they love. This is for all of us who kept going even when the path disappeared. Maria sat at the piano. The hall held its breath. She played Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most emotionally demanding pieces in the classical repertoire. The orchestra joined her, and together they created something that transcended technique. Every note carried weight, depth, the accumulation of years lived, struggled through, survived. Richard had heard Maria play dozens of times over the past 2 years, in recording studios, community centers, even his penthouse when she stopped by to work. But this was different. This was Maria playing not with something to prove, but with nothing to lose. Playing not as the prodigy she'd been, but as the woman she'd become. The audience wept openly. Richard saw business executives dabbing their eyes. Teenagers filming on their phones with tears streaming down their faces. The students who'd performed earlier standing in the wings, watching their teacher, their hero, claim the moment that had been stolen from her 3 decades ago. When the final chord faded, the silence lasted for several heartbeats. Then the hall erupted. People leaped to their feet, applauding, shouting, some throwing flowers onto the stage. The ovation went on for 10 minutes. Maria stood at the piano, overwhelmed, trying to bow but barely able to see through her tears. She gestured for the orchestra to stand, sharing the recognition. Then she beckoned to the wings, calling out the students who'd performed earlier. They joined her on stage, this unlikely collection of kids from forgotten neighborhoods, standing in Carnegie Hall receiving a standing ovation. At the reception afterward, Richard watched Maria move through the crowd. Music directors offered her concert tours. Recording labels wanted albums. Wealthy donors pledged millions to the foundation. But Maria seemed most interested in talking to the students, the teachers, the parents who'd brought their kids. A woman approached her, crying. "My daughter watched your video 2 years ago," she said in accented English. She's from Guatemala. "We clean offices like you did. But she saw you play and thought maybe she could learn too. Now she practices every day on the keyboard we saved 6 months to buy." Maria hugged the woman. "Where is she? I want to meet her." Richard felt a hand on his shoulder. It was David, his friend who'd posted the original video. "You did good, man. Really good. Maria did the good. I just stopped getting in the way." "That's not true. You built the platform, raised the money, made this all possible." Richard shook his head. "I provided resources. Maria provided the vision, the heart, the reason any of this matters. There's a difference." Later, after most guests had left, Richard and Maria stood on the empty Carnegie Hall stage. The cleaning crew was already starting their work, sweeping up programs and flowers. "Kind of fitting," Maria said, watching the cleaners. "Coming full circle. Do you still clean?" Richard asked. He'd never actually checked. She'd been drawing a salary from the foundation for over a year, but he wouldn't put it past her to keep the night job anyway. "No. I finally quit 6 months ago. It felt strange at first having evenings free, but now I teach extra classes instead, so I'm still not sleeping much." She laughed. Old habits. Was tonight everything you hoped it would be? Maria thought about this. It was better. Because 30 years ago, if I'd performed here, it would have been just about me. My career, my success, my talent. Tonight was about something bigger. Every note I played was for those kids, for everyone who needs to know that dreams don't expire. They just evolve. You evolved mine too, Richard said quietly. Before I met you, I thought success meant money and status and impressing people at parties. You showed me it means something completely different. What does it mean? Using what you have to help other people reach what they need. Building things that matter. Showing up even when it's hard. Being brave enough to change. He paused. You know, I still have that video saved on my phone. The one that started everything. Do you watch it? Sometimes. When I need to remember where I came from, who I was. It keeps me honest, Maria nodded. I watch it too sometimes. Not the playing part, I can't stand watching myself perform. But the moment before, when you ask me to play and I decide to say yes, I watch that moment because it reminds me that you never know when your life is about to change. When a door you thought was closed forever might crack open again. They stood in comfortable silence, looking out at the empty seats. Somewhere in the building, a piano was being played, probably a student who'd snuck back in to practice on the famous instruments. The notes drifted through the hall, imperfect but earnest. What's next? Richard asked. We've built the platform, launched the fellowship program, did the Carnegie Hall concert. What's the next impossible thing you want to attempt? Maria smiled. I want to open a school. A real physical place, not just online. Somewhere kids can come every day. Immerse themselves in arts, be surrounded by people who believe in them. That's a massive undertaking. I know, but 2 years ago, you asked a cleaning lady to play piano as a joke, and now we've changed 2 million lives. So I think we can figure out a school. Richard laughed. Fair point. Let's do it. They left through the stage door, stepping out into the New York night. The city was alive with light and noise and endless possibility. Just another Monday evening for most people. But for Richard and Maria, it was the celebration of a journey that had taken them both from their worst moments to something neither could have imagined. A young couple recognized Maria from the concert and asked for a photo. She obliged, chatting with them about music and dreams. Richard watched, marveling at how patient she was, how generous with her time and attention. As they walked toward the subway, Maria insisted on taking public transportation, saying she didn't trust anyone who forgot what it was like to ride the train. Richard thought about that night 2 years ago. How he'd been so sure of himself, so certain of his place in the world and everyone else's place below him. He'd been wrong about everything. Wrong about Maria, wrong about worth, wrong about what makes a life meaningful, and being wrong had been the best thing that ever happened to him. Thank you, he said suddenly, for giving me a second chance, for teaching me to be better. Maria linked her arm through his as they descended into the subway station. Thank you for being willing to learn. Not everyone is, you know. Most people would have made excuses, defended themselves, moved on. You actually changed. We both changed. Yes, Maria agreed. We both did. The train arrived, and they stepped into the crowded car, just 2 more people heading home after a long night. Nobody recognized them. Nobody knew what had happened on that stage hours before. They were invisible again, blending into the city's endless stream of humanity. And that, Richard thought, was exactly how it should be. Not every moment needed to be spectacular. Sometimes the best thing you could be was just another person on the train, grateful for second chances and determined to make the most of them.